Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into WML. And here I am going to be sharing my thoughts on Talk to Me, which is probably, I would say, one of the most talked about horror movies of the year. Talk to Me is an Australian supernatural horror debut from former YouTube filmmakers Danny and Michael Filippo. In it, a group of teenagers find an embalmed hand that allows them to communicate with the spirit world, and after having a little bit too much fun with it, they inadvertently open up the gates to hell. This has been getting a lot of absolutely ravenous attention, or at least was, leading up to and at the time of its release. There was one blurb in the trailer that really stuck out to me that said, Talk to Me is a film that takes you by the hand and guides you straight to hell. A24, whenever they bought the rights to it, said that it was the scariest movie they had ever acquired. There were a few people who I saw sort of describe it as this generation's The Evil Dead. And I think the big question is, does it live up to that hype? And in my opinion, not really. But I think that doesn't really speak so much to the movie's weaknesses as much as it does to the incredible level of hype that it was getting. And I think that at the end of the day, Talk to Me is still a very slick and fun and vicious horror debut from two really talented filmmakers. The Filippo brothers got their start on YouTube with these, very violent but comedic sort of sketch comedy videos that depict superheroes and different pop culture figures fighting each other in violent and absurd ways. And as juvenile as a lot of it is, there's still like a pretty remarkable level of technical ability coming through in those videos and a sense of adventurousness that sort of helped me understand how their talents were able to translate from that kind of YouTube background to horror filmmaking. And I guess it's another example of the sketch comedy to horror pipeline that we've seen with Jordan Peele and Zach Kreger of Wise Kids You Know fame. Here, the Filippo brothers take that mania that they had sort of demonstrated earlier in their career and they reel it in a little bit more to tell a, I guess relatively speaking, more restrained story about this very close group of tight-knit friends whose relationships I think are fleshed out enough that you, the viewer, become more invested in their peril and understand their concern for each other. Thinking about how the Filippo brothers come from a YouTube background also makes sense when I think about their approach to telling a horror story that's set in the social media era. There is a scene towards the beginning, a montage where the teenagers are taking turns with the embalmed hand, posing with it, using it to smoke a joint, taking the videos and posting them all to Snapchat. And it feels like a very appropriate depiction of again, it's a supernatural story that's set in the social media era. And there's something sort of, almost, I guess, postmodern or meta about this because we've seen this exact scenario sort of play out a thousand times before in horror movies. But, I really liked how much the Filippo brothers just really lean into it. You know that something bad is going to happen. You know that something's bad is going to happen in all of the, these kinds of setups in a horror movie. But, the fact that they're so, almost gratuitous about it, I really enjoyed. And it almost felt like, our culture sort of reflecting in on itself and then back out at us in a weird way. And I just think that the excitement of the situation is, and what sort of makes it this believable is just how exciting the situation is. And that comes through in how sort of kinetic the directing and the editing is. And just the sense of excitement that you get from these characters is very palpable. And the fact that they're sort of filming all of this and uploading it to social media, sort of, you can see how it only fuels their sense of abandon. It's the best depiction of social media that I can think of in a horror movie, and it made me sick to my stomach because I knew that all of that energy that was being built up was just going to be released back into something that much more horrifying. And unfortunately, it never really quite does. There are some very shocking moments of violence. I think that there are some very slick uses of interior spaces to build a sense of sort of suspension and dread. There's also a depiction of the afterlife that very effectively appealed to my Catholic fear of hell. But none of this really kind of lives up to that early sort of montage scene, in my opinion. There are different types of buttons that a horror movie can hit, and for me, one of my favorite things is to be frightened. I really like it if I'm watching a horror movie and part of my brain lights up and just starts to scream at me and tell me, I don't want to be here right now. I don't want to be experiencing this. I don't want to be watching this. And that's something that I really enjoy. And there was not really anything in this besides that sort of early montage scene that I'm talking about that really made me feel that way. It's also difficult to be frightened when you're not really surprised. And I felt like pretty early on, I just kind of recognized what direction everything was going in. And, you know, spoiler alert, but I mean, this is like the third or fourth horror movie I feel like I've seen in recent years where the sort of main supernatural evil antagonist, whatever you want to call it, sort of, you know, causes the characters to lose control of themselves and do bodily harm to themselves. Still, for all of those pointers against it and the sort of, you know, lack of, I think, payoff that comes with this really incredible build-up at the beginning, I still did really enjoy this as a sort of, you know, sometimes spooky, sometimes very gruesome, supernatural horror thriller. And I look forward to seeing what the Filippo brothers bring forward next, because I think that they're very talented and have demonstrated a level of confidence in a debut that I think is very striking. So for me, Talk to Me gets 3.5 out of 5 stars. And that's it. That's my review of the movie. You know, like, subscribe, comment down below. Let me know what you think of it. Do you think that it is one of the best horror movies of the modern era? Do you agree with me and think it's a little overrated? What are some of your favorite horror movies just come out this year? I feel like hasn't really been as this hasn't been as fertile a year for horror movies as I've seen in the last few years, but maybe I just haven't really been paying attention. So put me on to some of your favorite horror movies of the year. And until then, I will see you next time. Take care.